Welcome to AI TV News. This week, an unprecedented event unfolded at the heart of America's military power. Dozens of reporters packed their bags, turned in their press badges, and walked out of the Pentagon. In this segment, we'll explain what led to this historic standoff, what it means for press freedom, and how it could affect what you know about the U.S. military. On Wednesday, October 15, 2025, between 40 and 50 journalists from the nation's most prominent news organizations left their workspaces at the Pentagon. This wasn't a strike for better pay or working conditions. It was a protest. They refused to sign a new media policy by a 5 p.m. deadline, effectively ending their ability to report from inside the building. In a rare show of unity, outlets from across the political spectrum, including the Associated Press, Reuters, CNN, Fox News, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, all took part. The 5 major television networks, ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, and NBC, issued a joint statement condemning the new rules. The Pentagon Press Association, which represents journalists covering the department, called it a dark day for press freedom. For the first time since the Pentagon opened in 1943, there are now almost no major news outlets accredited to cover the Department of Defense from the inside. So what are these new rules that caused such a dramatic response? The issue lies within a new 21-page document that journalists were required to acknowledge. The most contentious part warns reporters they could lose their credentials for soliciting information that has not been officially approved for public release. This rule applies even to unclassified information. To a journalist, soliciting information is the very core of their job. It means asking questions, following up on tips, or seeking clarification from sources. Media organizations argue this new language effectively criminalizes routine news gathering. The Pentagon Press Association stated the policy carries an implicit threat of criminalizing national security reporting. Critics fear the rules are designed to create a chilling effect, intimidating not only journalists, but also government employees who might otherwise speak to the press about waste, problems, or wrongdoing. The new policy also restricts journalists' access within the Pentagon, requiring them to have an escort in many areas where they could previously move freely. The two sides in this dispute have fundamentally different views. The Pentagon, led by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, a former Fox News host, defends the new rules. His chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, called them common-sense measures needed for national security, saying they align with standards at other military bases. The Pentagon also argues that journalists were only being asked to acknowledge the rules, not agree with them. Journalists call this a meaningless distinction, arguing that signing the document could expose them to potential prosecution for doing their jobs. Secretary Hegseth has appeared dismissive of the media's concerns, and President Trump defended him, stating the press can be very disruptive. The journalists, on the other hand, see this as a direct assault on the First Amendment. They argue the policy is an attempt to control the narrative coming out of the Pentagon and force them to rely on spoon-fed official statements. Nancy Youssef, a veteran Pentagon correspondent, called it a sad day, but said she was incredibly honored to be part of a press corps that stuck together. News organizations insist they will continue to cover the military vigorously, but now they must do so from outside the building. This standoff didn't happen in a vacuum. The new rules were first introduced in September and were met with immediate backlash. A revised version was issued in early October, but press freedom advocates said it was just as dangerous. The move is seen by some as an effort by Secretary Hegseth to clamp down on leaks. With a defense budget approaching $1 trillion, news organizations argue that independent oversight is more critical than ever.
The departure of the press corps removes a key layer of public transparency from one of the most powerful institutions in the world. It is unclear what the long-term impact will be. While news organizations have vowed to continue their coverage, the lack of daily, in-person access to sources and officials will undoubtedly hinder their ability to report on the inner workings of the military. This historic walkout marks a new chapter in the relationship between the press and the Pentagon, highlighting the ongoing tension between the government's desire to control information and the public's right to know.
A major political and economic battle is unfolding on America's highways. The Trump administration has announced it will withhold $40.6 million in federal highway funding from California due to the state's alleged failure to enforce English proficiency requirements for commercial truck drivers. This move escalates a tense standoff between the federal government and the nation's most populous state, raising questions about public safety, immigrant rights, and the future of the supply chain. The announcement came from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, who stated that these funds, part of the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program, would be withheld. This program helps the state pay for essential safety activities like roadside inspections and traffic enforcement. According to Duffy, California is the only state that refuses to comply with federal rules, ensuring truck drivers can read road signs and communicate with law enforcement, calling it a fundamental safety issue. The administration's position is rooted in both law and a recent tragedy. The legal justification comes from a federal regulation requiring English proficiency for commercial drivers, recently reinforced through an executive order signed by President Trump in April 2025, reversing a more lenient Obama-era policy. The administration argues that public safety is at risk when drivers cannot read traffic signs or speak with officials at checkpoints. This policy shift was tragically highlighted by a fatal crash in Florida on August 12, 2025. A truck driver, Harjinder Singh, holding a commercial license issued by California, reportedly made an illegal U-turn, causing a crash that resulted in 3 deaths. Investigators later found that Singh had failed an English proficiency test. The Trump administration points to this incident as a clear example of the dangers of lax enforcement. Secretary Duffy also noted that since the new, stricter standards took effect, California has conducted around 34,000 inspections, but has only taken 1 driver off the road for an English language violation. California, however, tells a very different story. Governor Gavin Newsom's office has fired back, calling the withholding of funds a cynical and transparent political stunt and a direct attack on the state's large immigrant communities.
A spokesperson for the governor, Diana Crofts Palaio, argued that California's safety record speaks for itself, stating that commercial drivers licensed in California have a fatal crash rate nearly 40% lower than the national average. State officials insist they are in compliance with federal law. They argue that while they offer licensing exams in various languages to serve their diverse population, drivers are still required to understand enough English to read signs and communicate with officials. Regarding the tragic Florida crash, Newsom's office noted that California followed all required procedures when it issued the license to Singh in July 2024, and that the federal government itself had confirmed the driver's legal presence and valid work permit at the time. To understand how we got here, it's important to look at the history of this rule. The requirement for commercial drivers to speak and read English dates back to 1936 as part of the first motor carrier safety regulations. What has changed dramatically is the enforcement. In June 2025, the federal government began allowing inspectors to immediately place drivers who fail a roadside English test out of service. Previously, it was often just a citable offense. This change followed warnings sent in August to California, Washington, and New Mexico that they could lose federal funding if they didn't step up enforcement. Beyond the political fight, this rule is having a significant impact on the drivers themselves. The stricter enforcement has created a wave of fear and anxiety among immigrant truckers, many of whom are now enrolling in English classes to protect their livelihoods. During a roadside inspection, an officer can conduct an on-the-spot oral interview and ask a driver to identify and explain various road signs in English. The use of translation apps or pre-written cue cards is not allowed. This has led to concerns about the economy and the supply chain. In areas like California's Central Valley, community advocates estimate a high percentage of local drivers are not native English speakers. Sidelining a significant number of these drivers could cause major disruptions. However, the reaction from within the trucking industry is mixed. Some truckers, including those for whom English is a second language, have voiced support for the rule, agreeing that a common language is crucial for safety on the road.
The California Trucking Association has stated it will work to ensure the new enforcement is carried out objectively. So what happens now? The Department of Transportation has made its terms clear. To have the $40.6 million restored, California must adopt and enforce the English language rules and prove that its state inspectors are testing drivers' English skills during roadside checks. Secretary Duffy has also threatened to withhold an additional $160 million related to how California issues licenses to non-U.S. citizens. Governor Newsom's office has vowed to challenge the administration's action, likely setting the stage for a legal battle. This conflict is now a high-stakes test, pitting federal authority against state policy with the flow of commerce and the careers of thousands of drivers hanging in the balance.
Welcome to AI TV News. Why would a prestigious university turn down a deal for preferential access to millions in government funding? Today, we're explaining the story of Brown University's rejection of a controversial offer from the White House and what it signals for the future of higher education in America. On October 15, 2025, Brown University, a member of the elite Ivy League, formally rejected a deal from the Trump administration. This wasn't just any deal. It was an invitation to join what the White House calls the Compact for Academic Excellence in Higher Education. This 10-page proposal was first sent on October 1st to 9 prominent American universities. In exchange for signing, these schools were promised preferential access to substantial and meaningful federal grants. So what did the White House ask for in return? The compact laid out a series of significant policy changes. It would prohibit universities from considering race, sex, or political views in admissions. It would mandate the use of standardized tests for all undergraduate applicants. The deal also sought to restrict diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, often called DEI, which the administration claims can belittle conservative ideas. Furthermore, it would cap international undergraduate enrollment at 15%, require universities to screen out foreign students considered hostile to the U.S., and freeze tuition for 5 years. Finally, it would require single-sex spaces, like bathrooms, based on a definition of gender tied to reproductive function. Brown was the second university to publicly say no. The first was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, which rejected the deal a week earlier. In a letter to administration officials, Brown's president, Christina Paxson, explained the university's decision.
She stated that the compact would restrict academic freedom and undermine the autonomy of Brown's governance, critically compromising our ability to fulfill our mission. Let's break down those two key reasons. First, academic freedom. This is the principle that universities should be able to conduct research and teach subjects without outside political interference. President Paxson argued the compact would force the university to give up control over its own curriculum and academic speech. Second, she raised concerns about how research would be funded.
Traditionally, federal grants for scientific research are awarded through a competitive, merit-based process. The best ideas and most promising projects get the funding. President Paxson warned that this deal suggests funding could be awarded based on other criteria, not just the quality of the research. Her concerns were echoed by MIT's president, who said the deal was inconsistent with the core belief that scientific funding should be based on scientific merit alone. The decision at Brown was backed by what President Paxson called the vast majority of Brown stakeholders, including faculty and students. This compact is not happening in a vacuum. It's the latest move in a broader effort by the administration to influence higher education. Previously, the administration has frozen hundreds of millions of dollars in federal funding for other major universities, often citing investigations into alleged civil rights violations. What makes this story even more complex is that Brown University did make a separate deal with the administration just a few months ago, in July 2025. In that agreement, Brown had $510 million in research grants unfrozen. In exchange, the university committed $50 million to workforce training in Rhode Island, agreed to restrict transgender athletes from competing on teams based on their gender identity, and eliminated diversity targets in admissions. In her letter rejecting the new compact, President Paxson noted that the July agreement contained assurances that the government would not interfere with the university's curriculum, a protection she said the new compact does not offer. The White House has expanded its invitation to all U.S. colleges and universities, with President Trump stating that higher education has lost its way, and the compact is for institutions that want to quickly return to the pursuit of truth and achievement. The administration has also warned that institutions refusing to sign may face federal investigations, though it's unclear if funding will ultimately depend on signing the agreement. The proposal has been sharply criticized by many higher education leaders. The American Council on Education called it a horrible precedent to cede power to the federal government. Faculty at other universities, including Dartmouth, have organized against the compact, and student government representatives from several of the invited schools released a joint statement of opposition. So what we are seeing is a fundamental conflict over the role of America's universities. On one side, an administration seeking to use federal funding to reshape higher education policy according to its agenda. On the other, universities like Brown and MIT pushing back, arguing that such a move compromises the core principles of academic freedom and merit-based science. The decisions being made now could define the relationship between the government and higher education for years to come.